Do we have the date handy when Minister Butler was sworn in? Minister, you'd remember that. Red letter day for you.
I don't have the exact date, but it was in May.
All right, so we've got a 4-month gap. We've got a 4-month gap between when the minister was sworn in and when he made a declaration of a conflict to you, Professor Murphy.
Well, that relates to the nature of the conflict, which was not apparent, was not there in 2022. The measures were put in place prior to an employment arrangement commencing, which commenced in 2023.
An employment arrangement, there was no conflict of interest. You're saying now there's no conflict of interest before
I
that.
didn't say there was a conflict of interest before.
Sorry, Minister.
You asked me whether, I think the earlier question was whether conflict of interest need to be declared under the ministerial code, and I said yes, and that Minister Butler had been in compliance with the ministerial code of conduct at all times, which he has.
So when was... Minister, are you saying that the conflict arose at the time it was declared?
I'm saying that the arrangements that were put in place to manage a conflict or potential conflict of interest were put in place prior to that issue, essentially that issue becoming a conflict in 2023. So there was no conflict.
There was no conflict in
2022. Exactly.
Minister, I'm looking at the Register of Members' Interests dated 18th of August 2022, and Minister Butler has declared a conflict of interest with 89 Degrees East. I don't understand your statement there at all. How can he have a statement that's declarable on the Register of Interests
But there
that's
wasn't
not declarable?
There'd been a prior employment arrangement, okay, and then in 2023, then there was a break in that period. So he's declared that on his register about that arrangement that existed before. There was a break in that, and then prior to that employment arrangement continuing or commencing in 2023, steps were put in place to manage that as appropriate and in accordance with all of the advice provided to the Minister and in accordance with the Code of Conduct.
Minister, with all due respect, there was clearly a potential risk involved here, clearly a potential conflict of interest, that the Minister had an obligation under the Code of Conduct to report to the department, a department that was entering into contracts with 89 Degrees East through 22, and that conflict of interest was not declared until October of 22. I mean, quite frankly, Minister, there's a clear breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct here.
No, there hasn't been. No, I completely reject that.
A clear breach.
I completely reject that.
Was the conflict of interest declared when the Minister was sworn in? The evidence we have from Professor Murphy is that it was not declared to the department.
It was declared in the Register of Members' Interests, and then further steps were taken when an employment arrangement commenced or prior to that in 2023.
There is a Register of Interests obligation on all parliamentarians, Minister, but as you should very well know, there is also an obligation under the Ministerial Code of Conduct. Professor Murphy's earlier evidence, now he can change it if he wants to, but Professor Murphy's earlier evidence was that the conflict was not declared to the department until after October of 2022.
So, it's declared in the Register of Members' Interests.
That is not under the Ministerial Code of Conduct, okay. Minister. There is a 4-month gap.
Advice was sought about managing a potential
not until October.
Senator Brockman.
Yes,
Senator
and you're not
Senator
listening
Brockman and Senator
to
Gallagher,
me, or you're refusing to accept.
This process, excuse me, Senator Gallagher. This process works best when questions are asked and heard respectfully, and answers are given and heard respectfully. The Minister will have the opportunity to respond to your question, Senator Brockman, and then I will return to you for the call for a supplementary question. Senator Gallagher.
I've lost where I was, but the declaration was made. Advice was sought in the lead-up to an employment relationship commencing in 2023. There was no employment relationship in 2022.
Why did Minister Butler declare it on his
There had been a prior employment relationship.
So there was a conflict.
There was a prior.
It
did not exist in 2022, and further steps were put in place at the recommencement of that employment relationship in accordance with advice provided or advice sought and then provided through PM&C. Every step has been taken to declare and manage any potential for conflict of interest in this situation.
Minister, there is a 4-month gap. It's been very clearly revealed that there is a 4-month gap where the conflict of interest under the Ministerial Code of Conduct
There was no
not
employment relationship in 2022. What do you not understand about that, Senator
Well, then why was the
Brockman?
conflict of interest declared on the register of members' interests in 18th of October 2022?
For transparency and there had been a prior employment.
So the register of interests is to be treated as like an optional extra. It's not actually. This doesn't reflect reality.
Well, I mean, the question's got.
Is there a conflict of interest?
Senators, I'm struggling to work out who is seeking the call at the moment. Senator Brockman.
I mean, why was the conflict of interest declared on the 18th of August 2022, but not under the Ministerial Code of Conduct?
Advice was sought and provided in October around managing the potential for a conflict of interest to arise.
After that conflict of interest had already been declared, Minister.
At that time, there was no employment arrangement with the company. In the lead-up to that employment relationship commencing in 2023, further steps were put in place.
August 2022, Parliament of Australia, House of Representatives. My partner is engaged as a communications consultant with 89 Degrees East. No conflict of interest was declared under the Ministerial Code of Conduct. His department was entering into contracts with 89 Degree East.
No, that is not true. Advice was sought, a declaration was made, advice was sought.
When was the advice sought, Minister?
Well, we're coming back to you on that. I understand it was in October about managing the potential for a conflict of interest, and that was implemented prior to the employment relationship commencing in early 2023.
Minister, there is a clear statement of a conflict of interest having been in the Minister's mind prior to seeking advice that you have just sought. Why is that the case?
Sorry, I missed that bit.
There is a declaration of a conflict of interest on file prior to that advice being sought. He was clear, the Minister was clearly aware there was a conflict on hand at the time when he was Minister and before he made any declaration under the Ministerial Code of Conduct. In fact, before he even brought it to the Department's attention.
What was your question, Senator
I
Brockman?
don't know. It was a statement, I think.
Could you, if you would assist the committee, if you could direct it as a question?
Quite frankly, the Minister is denying what is on the public record
No,
now.
I'm not denying.
Senator Brockman and Senator Gallagher, we need a question for officials to answer.
The thing I think you're struggling with is the fact that someone has followed the rules and declared exactly...
You have not explained the gap, Minister.
Well, I don't know that... There is no gap. There was no employment arrangement which would raise the conflict of interest in 2022.
So the Minister...
There was none. Okay? So during that time, the potential for a conflict of interest had been declared. It had been declared to the Prime Minister. It had been registered on the register. There was advice sought about how to manage it, and those steps were put in place prior to any employment relationship commencing in early 2023.
Minister.
So every step has been taken. All advice has been followed.
You've said a number of times, Minister, that there was no employment arrangement in 2022. Why then did the Minister declare to the House of Representatives that his wife was engaged as a consultant in August of 2022?
My understanding is she had been engaged prior to 2022.
So there was no engagement of his wife in 2022?
No.
But what? But wouldn't... Then this raises the question of why the Minister would declare that on the register of interests. It seems to he's misleading the House of Reps then. If he said and those words that Senator Brockman read out, they are in the present tense, that my wife is engaged as a consultant for 89 Degrees East. If that was not correct in August of 2022, why would the Minister tell the House of Representatives that?
I'll see if there's anything further I can provide the committee, but
we need an explanation.
But my understanding is there had been an employment arrangement. I don't know how that's managed in the private sector, whether being engaged as a communications consultant involves being commissioned for particular pieces of work at particular points in time. So he has been very upfront that there is the potential for a conflict of interest that could foreseeably arise under Section 14 or be seen to arise, which is what the declaration is made. But I can assure you there was no employment arrangement in 2022 and steps were put in place to manage it prior to any employment arrangement commencing in 2023.
So just to be clear, my question is, was there any employment or consultancy or contract between the Minister's wife and 89 Degrees East in August of 2022 or any other time in 2022? I believe you've taken that on notice. Have you taken that on notice?
I'll come back.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the final question on this, happy to share the call. We've got a declaration. We've got an earlier declaration in April of 22 of this issue. Obviously, that is at a particular point in time.
August.
We've got another one in August. So clearly this was in the Minister's mind as a potential conflict of interest. And the Minister did not go to the department with this, or the Prime Minister, under the Ministerial Code of Conduct until October. And I think that is a huge gap that the Minister has to answer.
Well, no, I don't accept that. I don't accept that at all. The Minister has declared the potential for a conflict of interest. That was formalised in a letter in October, and steps were put in place prior to that conflict actually arising, which it did in early 2023 when significant steps were taken based on the advice of PM&C. So this is exactly what has happened. The Minister has followed all of the rules. And that might be a foreign concept to a government that never followed any rules. I accept that.
Come on. Can I just clarify that we would like all the correspondence on this matter from the PM, from the Minister on notice.